We now return to the Menendez brothers on trial, the real story.
There was something about the trial of California versus Menendez that fascinated all of us. Two brothers accused of shooting their parents to death stand trial. As the case unfolded, the nation watched on TV as a family that once seemed to have so much promise now unraveled before our eyes. The case got the country talking.
I do believe that the boys were sexually molested.
If they hadn't been caught, they would be getting away with the world.
A national pastime became an obsession for some. The news media had a field day. But beyond the fascination of a case that involved money and murder in Beverly Hills, there were the serious questions. How much should the past play a role in responsibility? Should child abuse be a factor in whether we hold the Menendez brothers accountable for their actions? It's still an emerging legal theory, using child abuse to explain later behavior.
The history of abuse is relevant because the nature of the homicide is affected, that person's mind is affected by 10 or 12 years of experience. It's as if it was a barroom brawl that took place over 15 years.
As the defense team goes back into court, they will test a relatively new theory of self-defense, a theory that's beginning to be used in cases of battered women. Traditionally, the law of self-defense requires proof that someone killed out of a reasonable fear in the face of an immediate danger, like a gun pointed to the head. But defense lawyers are arguing that years of abuse made the Menendez brothers so fearful that they thought they had no choice but to kill or be killed.
Can't interview here.
Good morning to you all, and we're ready to resume.
So while the state has argued the brothers planned their parents' murders, the defense argues a series of bizarre events took place a few days before the shootings that explain everything. It's the crux of their case. Both brothers describe those events as they testify.
Now, on Tuesday, what else do you remember besides not being able to practice tennis in the morning?
A fight between my mother and my brother.
When you say fight, you mean a physical altercation?
No, I just mean an argument.
At some point, she was moving toward me, and I kind of put my arms up because she flails with her fists sort of wildly, and she reached and she grabbed my hairpiece, and she just ripped it off.
She was yelling, and she was saying, "You don't need it. I don't care. I don't care what you want. You're not having it." And Lyle was right behind her, saying, "Please, please, I need it. It's not that big a deal. It's important to me." And I knew he had something done to his hair, but I didn't know what. And within a moment, I realized that it was a hairpiece, but I just couldn't believe it.
Eric Menendez says that revelation prompted him to confide in his older brother.
I told him that things between Dad and I were still happening, and that, and he kept asking what I was talking about.
So
and
did you tell him what you were talking about?
Finally, I told him. I told him that they were just sexual things.
I asked him why he didn't tell me a long time ago. I asked him why he didn't fight back, because he said that Dad was forcing him. And he was just crying, had no answers for any of it.
Lyle Menendez testifies that 2 days later, he confronted his father.
He said, what I do with my son is none of your business. And he said, I warn you, don't throw your life away. Just stay out of it. I told him that I would tell everybody I would tell everybody everything about him. And I would tell the police, and that I would tell the family. He said, we all make choices in life, son. Eric made his, and you've made yours. And then he just looked at me, and he got up to leave. I thought we were in danger. I thought he felt he had no choice.
But to what?
That he would kill us. That he would get rid of us in some way.
Why?
Because he thought I was going to ruin him.
He had told me never to tell Lyle, and that he had warned me not to do that, and now he said that Lyle was going to tell everyone, and that it was my fault, and now Lyle was going to tell everyone, and he was not going to let that happen. He was grabbing toward me, and I was able to just to fling my body away and run out the door.
So you got away from him?
Yeah. I just ran into the den.
Did you think there was anybody in the den?
Yeah, I thought there might be somebody in the den. The television was on.
And was there, in fact, anybody in the den?
Yes.
Who?
My mom. She said, "What's the matter with you?"
And what, did you respond to her when she said that?
Yeah, I said, "No, nothing. You won't understand."
What did she say?
Well, she said, "Oh, I know. I've always known. You think I'm stupid?"
I was the one that said that we weren't just going to stay around waiting to die. We were going to try and get some ways of defending ourselves and protection. And Eric mentioned the guns that we knew were in the house, and I figured there were probably more in the house. And dismissed that as a bad idea. They might notice they were missing and so on. So we just decided that we would buy our own the next day.
The next day was Friday.
Right.
Is that correct?
That was the day the brothers say they drove here, to a gun store in Santa Monica, to buy handguns.
Basically, we were in the process of trying to pick a handgun and buy one, and then we were told that we weren't going to be able to leave the store with them, that it took 2 weeks, a waiting period where they would have to check our credentials, and they did this mandatory check.
Did you end up in a gun store in San Diego?
Yes, we decided we would go ahead and buy shotguns, and that we felt that if we were going to get attacked, it would be at night, more likely, and so we felt we should buy them, and we went ahead and tried to do that.
When the brothers returned from San Diego, they say their mother told them the family was going on a fishing trip the next day. The brothers claim they stayed away from the house all day Saturday, but they say agreed to go on the trip.
What did you think was going to happen on the fishing trip?
We felt that the fishing trip was arranged to kill us in a way that nobody could know.
But the brothers were not threatened on that trip. It wasn't until the family returned home that Eric Menendez says his mother made a comment which he took as a threat.
She told me that if I would have kept my mouth shut, things might have worked out in the family.
On Sunday night, the brothers say tensions escalated when they got into a heated argument with their parents.
I was saying that he wasn't going to touch Eric, and he was just ignoring me and telling my brother to his face to get upstairs and wait for him.
I thought my dad was going to come up to my room and have sex, and I thought they were going to kill us.
You thought both things were going to happen?
Yes.
They walked into the den, and then my dad closed the doors. And,
what did you think was happening?
I was sure that that was it, and I just freaked out.
What did you think they were doing in the den? What did you think was going to happen?
I thought they were going ahead with their plan to kill us.
It was then the brothers got their new guns and went to find their parents in the family room.
We just burst through the doors, and I started firing.
I was just firing as I went into the room. I just started firing.
In what direction?
In front of me.
What was in front of you?
My parents.
There were just glass, and you could hear things breaking, and you could hear the ringing noises from the booms. And
I just fired as much as I could.
And how much was as much as you could? Did you empty the gun, or
every shell I had?
Do you remember firing a very close shot at your father?
I believe so.
At what part of his body?
From the side, behind, kind of. I ended up there. I don't remember the shot, really.
What was it that happened after the shooting ended?
I heard a noise from my mom.
And what was your reaction to that noise?
I just ran out of the room.
Where did you go?
To the car.
And when you got to the car, what did you do?
I started scrambling. Lyle and I were scrambling for any shell he could find, and I just handed him one.
And what did you do after you reloaded?
I ran around and shot my mom.
Where did you shoot her?
I just reached over and I shot her close.
I think that it's as possible that they bought those shotguns for defense, that they were afraid of their parents, as it is that they were planning to kill their parents.
Remember, the brothers' explanation need only cast reasonable doubt on the state's theory of cold-blooded murder.
Stay tuned for the Menendez brothers on trial, the real story. We now return to the Menendez brothers on trial, the real story.
Sometime after 10 o'clock on the night of August 20th, 1989, after the Menendez brothers shot their parents, they say they drove up to this deserted canyon and threw away the guns which have never been recovered. The brothers then say they scrambled to create an alibi, driving to a movie theater to buy tickets, and then to the food festival, where you may remember they called their friend, Perry Berman.
If you're going to be a good prosecutor, you've got to be able to sense when you're being lied to. It's just something you pick up.
But the prosecution doesn't buy their story about abuse, about the shooting, or about their alibi.
At this point, it'll be cross-examination of the witness, Lyle Menendez.
The state needs to portray the Menendez brothers as liars, liars who the jurors should not trust. Prosecutor Bizanich confronts Lyle Menendez with the now infamous 911 call.
They asked you a number of questions, and when they asked you those questions, you were crying, correct?
Right.
And at the same time, you were lying while you were crying. Is that correct?
Right.
Their credibility was the 911 tape starting off where they lied about it, lied to the police, they lied to the press, they lied to their relatives. Their credibility had quite a few holes in it.
But Prosecutor Bizanich isn't finished yet. She wants to portray Lyle Menendez as a heartless killer.
When you put the shotgun up against her left cheek and you pulled the trigger, did you love your mother?
Yes.
And was that an act of love, Mr. Menendez?
It was confusion and fear.
You were afraid of her at that point? Yes. What did you think she was going to do to you?
At that point, I wasn't consciously thinking anything in particular. I was just reacting.
So you went out into the front of the house, and you went to your car, and you got the ammunition out of a box or something?
No. My brother was already there, and I believe he handed me. He was doing something. It's not a great recollection, but he handed me the ammunition.
And then you loaded it into the shotgun.
And I ran back and loaded it as I was running.
Now, what was your mother doing when you came back into the room?
Nothing. She was not moving.
And you were afraid of her?
Yeah, I was so it's hard to look at it now because I was so consumed with what was going on and the chaos of it. I really wasn't consciously thinking.
Did you feel the gun touching something fleshy that moved when you pushed on it? Is that no?
No.
And after you did that, you went and you called the paramedics and you said, "Come help. I've just shot my mother." Right?
No. No, I didn't do that.
Well, you love this woman, you said.
Well, at that time, I wasn't thinking I loved this woman and she was my mother. I was just thinking that we were going to die. It was like survival mode, and I was running around and I was firing, and it was chaos and there was noise, and I was expecting to be fired at.
I noticed that Lyle almost went in total hysterics when he was talking to his defense attorney about the crime and crying and all that. How quickly he was able to change his whole mode of vernacular, his vocabulary, his manner of speech, his attitude, the whole thing just did an opposite change.
The state may have scored an important point. Was Lyle Menendez in fear for his life when he reloaded the gun and then went and shot his mother? Later, in a moment of high courtroom drama, prosecutor Lester Kuriyama sets a trap.
Even though you've lied in the past, you're telling the truth now, aren't you?
Yes, I am.
Did you truly go to the Santa Monica Big Five store on the morning of August 18th to buy these handguns?
Definitely.
And
without a doubt, I did.
You and Lyle did?
Yes.
And you and Lyle actually looked in this case and you selected these guns and you were told you couldn't leave the store with those handguns because there's a 15-day wait?
Yes.
Mr. Menendez, did you know that Big Five stopped carrying handguns in March of 1986?
No, I don't know that.
No.
Mr. Kuriyama, there were guns there, and we did look at them, and he did say we could not carry them anymore.
The courtroom was silent. Some of the jurors were visibly taken aback.
It's going to be our argument that the elaborateness of that particular lie is demonstrative of his ability to tell elaborate lies.
Leslie Abramson tried to pick up the pieces 3 days later when she got her chance to question Eric Menendez about the gun store.
Which was the stronger memory, if you can compare them? The memory that the store was on Santa Monica Boulevard, a block and a half from the freeway, or the memory that it was a Big Five?
That it was within a block and a half from the freeway in Santa Monica.
Do you know now where that store, the store that you looked at guns, was?
No.
I think it proved beyond a doubt that he was capable of lying up on that stand.
To me, the whole big long story about going to San Diego and buying the guns and going to 4 different gun stores is too convoluted to have been made up. And he stuck with it too well, in my opinion.
It's a question jurors are left with, whether Eric Menendez's story of trying to buy guns at the Big Five is credible. But there was another hotly contested issue besides the Big Five, the question of Eric Menendez's sexuality.
Mr. Menendez, have you had homosexual relations with anyone other than, as you've indicated, your brother?
It's a subject the state has tried to bring up in the trial, but without much success. The state asserts that Eric's alleged homosexuality could help explain why Jose Menendez disapproved of his son. The state contends that was the cause of the conflict between the two. But should Eric Menendez's sexual preference, whatever it may be an issue in the trial?
My objection is that it's outside the scope of the evidence to argue that my client was a homosexual or that his sexual orientation was in any way a motive for this crime.
Counsel knows quite well that I have attempted to bring in witnesses who would testify as to Mr. Eric Menendez's homosexuality.
They want this jury to believe that it's okay, first of all, that he's homosexual, which he is not, and second of all, that it's okay to rape homosexual boys because they like it, or they had it coming, or they're only faggots and we don't care about them.
I could care less whether he was homosexual or not. The fact that I was focusing in on was that he killed his parents. And I think heterosexuals, homosexuals, or whoever can kill people.
They didn't allow it during the whole trial. There must have been a reason, like maybe there's no evidence of it, or maybe it doesn't have anything to do with the killings.
It would be an issue that Eric's jurors would fight over for hours and hours during deliberations. Meanwhile, prosecutors continue their cross-examination with some hard questions. First, why these grown young men didn't leave home.
So would it be fair to say then between Tuesday and Thursday, before you had your talk with your father, you did not consider leaving? Is that correct?
No.
And you didn't consider going to the police?
No, never. That I knew would...
And you didn't consider going to get help from your relatives? Correct?
Definitely not.
And the relatives who've all come in here and testified on your behalf, you didn't think of going to any of them?
Right, like you said, everything I knew about my father, you didn't just go to some relative and say, you know, he's doing this with my brother, you know, help me out. Nobody in my family would stand up to my father.
And the state has another question. Prosecutor Bizanich confronts Lyle Menendez with a photograph that shows what was found next to the bodies of his parents.
Do you recognize the glasses that are here? There appears to be a glass with liquid, then there's another glass that appears to have a spoon and some white substance. Do you recognize those as being the glasses that your family used to drink from?
Yes.
And you see there's a Michael Jackson cassette tape here.
Right.
Did your family have a Michael Jackson cassette tape?
I'm sure they did.
It looks like a cigarette lighter.
Right.
Your parents smoked?
Right.
Okay, and there appears to be some papers here from UCLA. Do you see those papers here?
Yes.
And your brother was about to go to UCLA, wasn't he?
Yes.
Now, what on this coffee table was threatening to you?
Nothing.
It's a point that will stick in the jurors' minds. While the brothers have testified they were in fear for their lives, the state has tried to show that the defendant's fear is fabricated. But there is one issue the state did not pursue: sexual abuse.
Is there anything I can ask you or say to you that's going to get you to say that those allegations are untrue?
They are true.
Okay, so there's nothing I can say to you to get you to say that they're not true, right?
No.
This is not a child abuse trial. This is a murder trial. And we are not in a position to dispute or admit the child molestation.
Prosecutors did not challenge the brothers about the alleged sexual abuse. The question of whether those claims were true was left uncontested.
Stay tuned for the Menendez brothers on trial, the real story. We now return to the Menendez brothers on trial, the real story.
As the trial of California versus Menendez unfolds, it becomes clear that part of the defense strategy is to put Kitty and Jose Menendez's personal lives on trial. There's been testimony that Kitty Menendez had a drinking problem, and Jose Menendez had been unfaithful to his wife and abusive to his children.
All right, are we ready to proceed?
Now the defense will try to substantiate accusations of abuse in the Menendez home with a series of experts who first confirmed the brothers were abused.
He was a basket case. He was crying.
And later explain how abuse actually changes how a victim's brain works.
What is important in traumatized populations is they begin to read the cues differently. This is what we call the rewiring, and they will read more danger into cues than necessarily a non-traumatized population.
You get to a point where chemistry and biology take over if you've been conditioned with fear.
I don't think that psychologists and psychiatrists belong in the courtroom unless someone is totally insane. If the person's lying about being afraid, then none of these biological things occur. Is that correct?
Overall.
Well, I think that the point of the biological model is that you have the physiological response, and that is something that you can't deny.
But if you aren't in fear, you don't have the physiological response that you've described in your testimony, correct?
Yeah, if you're not in fear, correct.
They were talking about the little things, small little things, about how they reacted in different circumstances that added up to say, you know what, this really happened.
I thought that the expert witnesses were very credible, and I think that it was a big mistake on the part of the prosecution to not have any counter-expert witnesses.
In fact, the prosecution will not call any expert psychologists to challenge the defense. It's a strategy that could end up hurting them. Meanwhile, a battle that has been percolating for years between the two sides comes to a head. Remember Dr. Oziel, the brother's therapist? Remember how Dr. Oziel actually tape recorded a key therapy session? Well, the jurors know nothing of that tape, and now that tape of the brother's confession becomes the focal point of the trial.
We wait until we resolve the tape recording before we go.
The prosecution argues that because the brothers and their experts testified in such detail about the brothers' states of mind, the jury now be allowed to hear all of the evidence, including this tape, despite the doctor-patient privilege.
We'll go off the record so that the tape can be played.
Judge Stanley Weisberg agrees. So the defense decides to introduce the tape first, to take the sting out of the evidence. As the brothers' voices are heard, jurors are taken back to the Beverly Hills office of Dr. Jerome Oziel, December 11th, 1989.
Beyond strength, I was nowhere going to make a decision to kill my mother without Eric's consent. I didn't even want to influence him in that issue. I just let him sleep on it in a couple days.
Can that be seen as a sign of premeditation? That seems to be ammunition for the prosecution, and so does this.
I think one of the biggest pains you have is that you miss just having these people around. I miss not having my dog around, if I can make such a gross analogy.
But like everything else in this trial, nothing is entirely clear, and the tape recording also includes statements that seem to support the defense's position.
Did you ever try to tell your mom or talk to your mom about what your dad was doing? No, I couldn't face that. I left that up to my brother. I couldn't face that.
It wasn't a forced confession, you know, on that tape. So it was clear to me that these guys were spilling their guts to this psychologist for whatever reason.
Dr. Jerome Oziel has once again become the centerpiece of the courtroom drama, and damaging his credibility is now more important than ever to the defense.
Judelan Smith.
To help do that, the defense calls Oziel's former lover, Judelan Smith. You may remember she's the one who originally turned the brothers in. Smith testifies that after she learned of the Menendez brothers' confession, Oziel moved her into his home. He told her for her own protection.
During that period of time, were you carrying on a romantic involvement with Dr. Oziel?
I wouldn't call it romantic.
Well, sexual.
But there was sex.
And his wife was still in the picture at that point. In other words, she was still in the home.
She and I were, I would say we were very good friends.
Judelan Smith describes an unorthodox relationship with Oziel, and in a claim that sounds more like pulp fiction than testimony, she says he drugged her and held her hostage.
Did he in fact assault you physically while you were in the home to keep you there?
Yes, he did.
And did he tell you that the Menendez brothers, he would inform the Menendez brothers that you knew about them in order to keep you in the home?
Rephrase the question.
Did he tell you that you were going to stay in the house, and if you didn't stay in the house, he was going to tell the Menendez brothers that you knew about them?
Yes, he did.
But using Smith to portray Oziel as an untrustworthy man is only the first step for the defense. The second step is to somehow explain why the brothers' confession was recorded on that now famous audio tape. Earlier, Oziel had denied doing anything underhanded.
Did you make the tape recording for the purpose of creating a false record so that you could use the tape to extort money out of the Menendez brothers?
No, Mr. Bird, I did not.
But now, Judelan Smith contradicts her former lover.
Do you remember as late as March of 1990 in one of the tape-recorded sessions you made with the police that he said something along the lines of, "Get out of here, Judelan, there's $14 million involved here"?
Yes.
The defense is implying that Dr. Jerome Oziel was using the brothers, somehow cajoling them into inflating their story so that he could later extort money.
It was clear to them from the first sessions that this was the story Oziel had pieced together, and this is the story Oziel wanted to hear, and this tape is being made to satisfy Oziel.
You have to think about what are Oziel's motives for making this tape and for asking these questions, and what are their motives? What are they still trying to hide? How much of this can you take at face value?
I think to say all these bad things about Dr. Oziel when there are two dead bodies lying on the ground
that belong to the defendants really is missing the point. Ms. Smith, you want to discredit Dr. Oziel. That's what you want to do, right?
I don't have any need to discredit Dr. Oziel. Dr. Oziel is a discredit.
The story of Judalon Smith and her twisted relationship with Dr. Jerome Oziel, and by association with the Menendez brothers, has captivated the courtroom and the country. It's been something of a sideshow for the defense team, and as the defense rests its case, jurors will have to sort out that story and whether it should have any bearing on the guilt of Eric and Lyle Menendez.
We now return to the Menendez brothers on trial, the real story.
The defense has rested, but the trial of Eric and Lyle Menendez is not yet over. The state still has one last chance to punch holes in the defense's case. But prosecutors have made a tactical and perhaps fatal decision not to attack the brothers' claim of sexual abuse.
If you believe it, it doesn't justify the murders because you can't believe their version of what happened between August the 15th and August the 20th.
Instead, the state's plan is to destroy the brothers' claim that they were in fear for their lives the week before the killings.
My name is Grant Frederick Johnson Walker.
The prosecution calls a man who says he spent time at the Menendez house the day before the shootings. He's the man who repaired their pool, and his name is Grant Walker.
Did you notice any young men around that time?
Yes, there were 3.
There were 3. Could you describe them for me?
There was 2 in white tennis outfits, and there was another gentleman on the court in the rear.
And as far as the ages of the 2 people in the tennis outfits, were they older or younger than the other man that you've described?
They were younger.
And do you see them in court here today?
Yes, I do.
Did you ever overhear any conversation between Eric Menendez and his parents?
One time.
And could you tell us what the nature of the conversation was between Eric Menendez and his parents?
He seemed to be angry with his parents also.
Remember, the brothers had testified they were out of the house all day that day. On cross-examination, as she was apt to do throughout the trial, Leslie Abramson takes on the witness with a battering ram.
You thought both of these boys were rude to their parents, is that right?
Yes.
And that's what you came forward to tell these juries, that they were rude to their parents, is that right?
Yes.
And therefore they couldn't have been abused or molested because they were rude to their parents, right?
Sustained.
What vulgar thing did Lyle say? Understand my question?
Yes, I understand
Go
the
ahead,
question.
tell us. We can stand it.
Different words, I don't choose to say them.
Well, I'm asking you to say them. So
I
please say
understand
them.
you're asking me to say them. I don't choose to say them.
Is that it?
I'm just uncomfortable.
Well, do you recall the words?
I feel uncomfortable.
Well, go ahead. What words did you hear?
Fuck.
Uh-huh.
And words similar to that.
There are words similar to fuck?
Yes, there is.
So they said fuck and they said shit.
Yes.
And you had never heard teenage boys say fuck or shit before, is that right?
Sustained.
Yes, I have, but not to their parents.
While Grant Walker maintains he overheard the brothers' conversation, there is nothing in writing that confirms his claim he was there that day. The prosecution continues its assault on the brothers' version of events leading up to the shootings.
Please take the stand and state your name correctly.
The state calls Flor Surya to the stand, the Menendez's live-in housekeeper.
Did you hear this man, Lyle Menendez, crying and saying that someone had pulled off his wig?
Y usted oyó a este señor Menéndez llorando y diciendo que alguien le había quitado su cosa del pelo. No.
That's intended to refute the notion there was a fight that night, as the brothers had described.
Ms. Pisarsik, were you Lyle Menendez's girlfriend for a period of time?
Yes.
Jamie Pisarsik is another witness who could sink Lyle and Eric's case. She's Lyle Menendez's former girlfriend. Pisarsik takes the stand to testify about a conversation with Eric that took place months before the shootings.
Who started the conversation about Lyle's hairpiece?
I believe Eric started the conversation.
And what did he say?
He was just amazed. He was kind of joking because he was amazed that Lyle had all this time had the hairpiece, because Lyle had the hairpiece for a while prior to that, and he didn't know, and that was why he was amazed, because Lyle's hair always looked so perfect.
Okay, did he indicate? All right, and did he indicate to you that he hadn't known about it up until the time of your discussion?
Objection leading.
Yeah, he did not know right from the start when Lyle got his hairpiece. He did not know initially, but he had found out at some course.
Jamie Pisarcik's testimony could cripple the brothers' story. If Eric Menendez previously knew all about his brother's hairpiece, then that revelation could not have started the family explosion, as the brothers claim.
Had Lyle Menendez asked you to do anything for him while he'd been incarcerated regarding research at the law library?
Yes.
Could you tell us what he asked you to do, please?
He asked me to look up several cases, and at the time he gave me the case names and numbers, if there was a number to them, and asked me to look those cases up and get copies made of them. The cases were, child molestation, and children had killed their parents and gotten off.
On cross-examination, attorney Jill Lansing strikes back.
If Eric Menendez was at the Easter Bowl March 17th to March 25th, does it seem unlikely that he was home for the conversation you've related?
Well,
Overall.
I have not stated that I had the conversation with Eric on that weekend that you are alluding to.
Well, you said it was either March or April. Is that correct?
It could have been late February. I do not remember exactly when that conversation was.
Okay, so before it was spring or summer. Late spring. And now it could be February?
Objection argument.
Overall.
Now it could be February?
I cannot remember the exact date of that conversation.
Well, when you say, do you think of February as spring or summer?
I would consider February early spring.
In New Jersey? Are you aware that there are no published cases of children charged with killing their parents who claim sexual abuse and are acquitted? Did you know that?
Well, maybe the ones Lyle was asking me to look at were appealed cases. I don't know that.
But you said that they were acquitted or found not guilty.
That is what I remember. Can't say that there was not an appeal on those cases.
But you remember specifically that they were found not guilty?
That was the context of the defense, yes.
Okay. You've indicated that at some point while Menendez was in jail, he gave you back the engagement ring?
Yes.
Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Do you still have it?
No, I do not.
What'd you do with it?
I tried on 2 separate occasions to give it back to Lyle.
Where is the ring now?
I do not know. I do not have that ring now.
What did you do with the ring?
Several of the stones fell out and were lost.
The diamonds?
Yes. And then I sold the remaining stone.
What'd you do with the money?
I'm sure I put it in my bank.
The question of how credible Jamie Pisarcik is will be a factor in the jury room.
Mr. Anderson, you are the brother of Mary Louise Menendez, is that correct?
That's correct.
Before the state wraps up its case, it calls witnesses who portray the brothers as smug and disrespectful.
She was very disturbed, very unhappy.
An uncle who says Kitty Menendez was upset with the brothers' carefree and irresponsible ways, and Jose Menendez's former secretary.
Marlene Eisenberg.
She testifies about an odd conversation she had with Lyle Menendez after the memorial service for his parents.
Okay, and what did Lyle Menendez say to you as you were returning from the memorial service?
His right leg was crossed over the front of his left leg, and he said, "Hey, Mozzie, who said I couldn't fill my father's shoes?"
Did you respond to him?
I did. I said, make your own tracks in life. Don't try to fill his shoes. And Lyle said, "You don't understand. These are my father's shoes."
It's been an odyssey of sorts in this courtroom for the last 4 months, a jumble of facts and stories and emotions.
I think that all of us are weary of this case and would like not to see the Menendez brothers every day.
As the case comes to a close, Judge Weisberg makes a critical decision.
I don't find that there has been any substantial evidence, any evidence justifying the jury being instructed on perfect self-defense.
Weisberg rules that no reasonable person would have feared their parents under the circumstances that the brothers described. In legal terms, Judge Weisberg has ruled out perfect self-defense. And as the case wraps up, jurors will be left to consider only the degree of the brothers' guilt, from first-degree murder to manslaughter, but they will not have the legal option to let Eric and Lyle Menendez walk out of the courtroom free men.
Stay tuned for the conclusion of The Menendez Brothers on Trial, the real story. Now, the conclusion of The Menendez Brothers on Trial, the real story.
To the world, Jose and Kitty Menendez had it all. A house in Beverly Hills, a rising Hollywood career, and 2 sons who seemed full of promise. But somewhere, something went very wrong. Today, the dream is gone. The Beverly Hills home has been sold, and the family fortune is no more.
I think that this is like a Greek tragedy, and in a Greek tragedy, everybody dies at the end.
In this Van Nuys courtroom, both the state and defense have tried for over 5 months to answer the question why. Why Lyle and Eric Menendez killed their parents.
We're now ready to proceed with the argument phase of the case.
Now, in a last plea, prosecutor Pamela Bazanich tries to focus jurors on what she thinks this case is about.
Look at these defendants, look at their crimes, look at what Lyle Menendez has tried to sell you as a defense. Look at the lies that he has told you on the witness stand and ask yourself, can you believe anything that this man says? There's no possible way. He is not acting like an adult. He wants you to believe he's a child, he's a boy, he's not responsible, he's a victim. He's an adult, he's responsible for his actions, he planned out this crime. And rather than taking whatever his background was, and I don't think we can be sure at all what his background was. You've been painted a picture here, but it's just a picture. It's not real.
While the state argues for accountability, the defense argues for understanding.
It may be hard for you to believe that these parents would have killed their children. Maybe it wouldn't be hard. But is it so hard to understand how these children would have believed their parents would kill them?
This is the crime of Eric Menendez. And I cannot show you the crime that Jose Menendez committed on him, but you heard about some of the things that he liked to do to his little boy. And one of them was to stick tacks like this in his thighs and in his butt, and to run needles across his penis.
As the Menendez case comes to a close, jurors are left with as many questions as answers. Should the brothers be judged by their acts alone? Or should events in Eric and Lyle's past be considered in determining their guilt?
At this point, then, we'll ask that the clerk swear in the bailiff, and he will take charge of the jury and the alternates.
The burden now falls from the lawyers to the jurors. And the decision is a complicated one. The two juries must decide between first-degree murder, that the brothers premeditated killings, second-degree murder, that the brothers killed maliciously but without a plan, voluntary manslaughter. For this, jurors would have to agree the brothers honestly believed they were in fear for their lives, however unreasonable that may now seem, and finally, involuntary manslaughter, which amounts to an accidental killing.
Jurors have just broken for lunch. They'll be back at work at about 1 p.m.
Obsessed court watchers around the country began their wait. More than 3 weeks went by.
It was a very physically, emotionally, and intellectually debilitating process. It was very, very difficult. It's the hardest thing I've ever done.
I mean, it's been the strangest thing I've ever been through. I mean, my mother died. My son was born. You know, I moved. I went through all the stuff. I haven't shed a tear in 5 months.
Before it was over,
the very latest on earthquake recovery in L.A.
Big events would happen outside the closed doors. But inside, as the days started to tick by, the jurors became more and more polarized.
We realized that we just basically did not agree on what those basic facts meant. We agreed what the facts were. We could not agree on their interpretation.
You have these two bodies here. Then you go back and show that people bought guns. Then you show that they made up alibis. And you show that they carried out their plan. And you got them on tape talking about doing all of this. Now, what other facts can you go get? I mean, you could speculate, but what other facts could you go get?
It wasn't that they were so cute. I couldn't imagine the idea of keeping them in jail for the rest of their lives or putting them to death. There wasn't enough evidence for me.
We're now going to have the jury and the alternates come into the courtroom. The court finds that the jury is hopelessly deadlocked and declares a mistrial.
After 19 days of confrontation in the jury room in the case of Eric Menendez, the jury comes back hung. And 15 days later, Lyle's jury returns deadlocked as well, becoming one of the longest jury deliberations in a California murder trial, 25 days altogether.
I was disappointed, I was deflated, I was angered.
I felt like, in a way, it had been a big waste of time.
With the evidence that we had, we should have came up with a conviction.
In spite of the fact that people complain about crime, it appears that individual responsibility is no longer a moral value and that people basically want to find excuses for other people's behavior.
We never argued that child abuse is an excuse for murder. What we argued is child abuse creates a terrible fear, and that fear in a certain set of circumstances can cause people to act because they feel they have no choice.
We now know that what happened in the jury rooms was a mirror image of the debate that raged across the country. Some believed their story of abuse, some did not.
I didn't buy the sexual part of it because there was no evidence shown to me. You know, I mean, where was it?
Without being able to agree on whether Lyle and Eric Menendez were sexually abused, it became more difficult for the jurors to agree on the ultimate question of responsibility.
The abuse helps explain how they might have reached the conclusion that their lives were in danger. But it wasn't just, we'd been abused all our lives, our parents deserved it.
Whether or not somebody abuses you, you do not have the right to kill them or to hurt them, and you should be held accountable for that. And I think that every juror on both juries feels the same way, that in fact they should be held accountable, and we just couldn't decide how accountable. Murder, second degree, first degree, or manslaughter.
Despite all that uncertainty and the money already spent on prosecuting this case, the state of California isn't giving up.
This office is going to try this case again as a first-degree murder case because that's what it is.
4 years have passed since Eric and Lyle Menendez shot their parents. Still, questions remain unanswered. Whether the state can ever get a conviction is the biggest question of all.
I don't think 12 people will... I predict another hung jury.
For Court TV, I'm Terry Moran.
For a copy of this or any other Court TV program, write to Court TV Video Library Service, 600 3rd Avenue, New York, New York 10016.